Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy is a huge episode for early SpongeBob, since it introduces one of the show's most memorable reoccurring ideas. And that's SpongeBob and Patrick's obsession with their favorite retired superheroes. Like, these two are super fans of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, which you can't really blame them. I mean, like, their cartoon looks pretty dope in this episode. I would watch it. Now, the whole plot of this episode is built around them trying to bring Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy out of retirement after watching their old adventures on TV. And I mean, it's kind of obvious, but for those who don't know, this entire episode served as the introduction to these two characters. Like, we had never seen them before this. And I mean, come on, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy would go on to be some very iconic SpongeBob characters. Rest in peace to their voice actors. But yeah, let's dive into some production details and trivia and all of that stuff, as we get two shots of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy in this episode, and there's something that I actually noticed. At the beginning, we see the younger Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy in the show that SpongeBob is watching on his TV, and later we see their elderly versions at Shady Shoals. And here's the thing, there's actually model sheets that exist for both versions. The younger versions are very clearly inspired by classic superhero characters, especially Aquaman and Aqualad. Young Mermaid Man in particular looks extremely close to Aquaman if we do a side-by-side, just with a couple of changes like this star on his nose, and this M belt buckle instead of an A. But the references don't stop there. In this episode, we also learned about the Aquaphone.
The Aquaphone! What is it, Chief? Hello? Hello? Hello?
If you're a nerd like me, you probably already know, but the Aquaphone is basically SpongeBob's version of the Bat Phone from Batman. And there's more, as Mermaid and Barnacle Boy also have the Invisible Boatmobile. And this thing feels like a mix between Wonder Woman's Invisible Jet and the iconic Batmobile. At least in concept, since, you know, it's literally invisible. There's also some other characters in this episode that seem to be references to the superhero or comic book world. Reflecto, for example, this guy right here, feels like a joke on names like Electro from Spider-Man, or Reducto from Birdman, at least in terms of name. But what makes all of these references, like, interesting to me is they're not just blatant parodies. They've like taken concepts that people already knew, like Aquaman, and just put a SpongeBob filter over it, which is kind of cool. But let's talk about the young and old versions of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy even more, as I noticed a strange design inconsistency that's honestly really easy to miss. As young men, both characters have 5 fingers, as you can see right here. They got 5 fingers. But as elderly men, they now suddenly only have 4. I mean, the reason for this is obvious, like both versions of the characters were drawn in different art styles. For example, the younger designs, you know, they look like your typical comic book characters or heroes, while their elderly designs were made to fit more naturally into SpongeBob's main world. But yeah, the art team made a little bit of a mistake here, I guess, because like I said, 4 fingers in this shot, but then 5 fingers in this shot. Moving on though, since this episode took place largely at a retirement home, it also introduced a lot of new incidental characters. And these ones were different from many of the background fish introduced in earlier season 1 episodes, since the setting of this episode required these new incidentals to be old, just like the elderly versions of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. And this resulted in us getting incidentals 80 through 94. And you'll notice that like most of them look very old. Also, I just want to say some of these characters have become pretty recognizable over time. Like during this episode, it was their first time ever appearing. These are characters that are still used to this very day in SpongeBob. But yeah, this is another example of the episode's setting shaping the entire background cast. Earlier episodes like Ripped Pants, which I have a whole video on by the way, needed beachgoers, so a bunch of incidental characters were created just for that. While another episode that's a good example is Pickles. That episode needed a bunch of Krusty Krab customers, so the art team introduced a bunch of new ones. Just in the case of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, this time we got a bunch of cool old people. Another thing I want to mention though is that this episode actually marked the debut of the Shady Shoals retirement home itself. This is the first time that the location actually appeared within an episode, and the art team clearly put a lot of work into making it usable beyond just this one episode, as there were multiple paintings and model sheets created just for Shady Shoals, which shows that the crew wanted the building and its interior to have a clear identity. And I'm sure that when the animators like animate new scenes of Shady Shoals, or at least in season 4 and season 5, season season 3 in those earlier seasons, I'm sure that these paintings and model sheets were used as reference shots. Now, this location has returned many times over the years, and what's interesting is that it stayed pretty consistent compared to its first ever appearance. And this is interesting because some SpongeBob locations have changed a lot since their first appearance. For example, Patrick's Rock Home. But Shady Shoals already had a strong design from the start. So even if we look at episodes from season 16, the location is still nearly identical. But let's keep it moving, as this episode also hints at another major Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy location, even though we don't actually see it yet in this episode. As at one point, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's hideout is referred to as the Sea Cave.
Quick, Barnacle Boy! Back to the Sea Cave!
Right, Mermaid Man!
Most of you probably know this, but this isn't the name of this location. This is interesting because it's basically an early version of what would later become the Mermalair, as the location was only ever referred to as the Sea Cave in this episode, so it shows that it was like an early production name for the location before they updated it to the Mermalair. And this is also a reference, as the name Sea Cave was probably meant to be a direct reference to the Bat Cave, which fits with all the Batman-style parody already happening in this episode. But yeah, like I said, after this, that name just disappears. As if we jump forward to Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, the location is finally shown properly and animated and officially referred to as the Mermalair. Another small debut happened in this episode right at SpongeBob's house. Now, in all of these season 1 episodes I've been covering, I've been kind of showcasing how certain locations have evolved or developed since Help Wanted. And SpongeBob's house has been a major topic in a lot of the videos I've covered. But yeah, this episode quietly added SpongeBob's signature TV to his living room. Before this, we had already gotten a glimpse of his living room in the episode Jellyfishing, but this was the first time that the TV would actually be added to his living room, which might seem like a mundane feature to point out, but it matters because SpongeBob watching TV becomes a reoccurring setup for plenty of later jokes. For example, the hilarious moment where Gary catches SpongeBob watching something inappropriate in the episode Your Shoes Untied, before changing the channel to some sports. Yeah, SpongeBob, you definitely were watching something that you shouldn't have been watching. I mean, he's a grown adult, so he can do whatever he wants, and as long as he isn't watching like Cartoonology or Sponge Truths or any of those other awful shitty channels, it's okay, SpongeBob. You can watch your weird dancing sea creature videos, it's okay. But hey, SpongeBob is also seen watching something specific in this episode, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, as the cartoon on his TV is The Adventures of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. And here's a random fun fact about this shot right here. In this shot right here that's shown in this episode was actually reused years later in the episode The Krusty Slammer, during a scene where we see a prisoner watching it in jail. The exact same scene. We'll do a side by side, and as you can see, it's the same thing. Now, this was most likely the animators or production team being lazy, and you can't blame them, right? 2D animation is really hard, but I will say this is also some cool world building, whether it was done intentionally or not. But it's cool that SpongeBob and this random convict are just watching the same classic episode of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, which is a show within the SpongeBob universe, right? Like, this episode exists in the SpongeBob universe. But I mean, like I said, realistically, it was probably just the art team reusing footage because it already existed and just fit this moment perfectly. Either way, it's funny that this fake cartoon within SpongeBob became reusable enough to show up again years later. And just saying, while we're on the topic of the show itself, The Adventures of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy is clearly modeled after the 1960s Batman TV show, as well as Filmation's Aquaman cartoons. I mean, dude, even the title card of this episode resembles the Aquaman title card, especially with that whirlpool style design. But yeah, I do want to make it clear this episode does a lot more than just reference other superhero shows, because it created an entire in-universe superhero franchise that Patrick and SpongeBob genuinely love. And I really like that in SpongeBob. I like that there's a show within a show, if that makes any sense. But let's keep it moving. I've got some other bits of trivia and just interesting shit that I want to talk about. So let's dive into that, as there's also this really weird sound effect connection between this episode and another Sailor Mouth, which I cannot wait to cover. We're not at Sailor Mouth yet because we've been going in order of how all of the season 1 episodes aired, but I love Sailor Mouth. But anyways, in that episode, the whole joke is that Bikini Bottom has a set of bad words, with different sound effects censoring each one. But believe it or not, one of those sound effects actually appears earlier in this episode. When Mermaid Man picks up the phone during the checker scene, this sound plays as the ringtone.
The aquaphone!
Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because that ringtone sound is the exact same sound effect later used for bad word number 11 in Sailor Mouth.
You said number 11.
Most likely, the production team just reused a sound from their sound library before it actually had any meaning attached to it. But then later, once they used it in Sailor Mouth, it became associated with the swearing. So I doubt the production team even noticed this. But like I said, it's really interesting and funny because Sailor Mouth would air after this episode. But yeah, let's head over to another SpongeBob episode, guys, with even more trivia, Easter eggs, what I always say, you guys know. But real quick, if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for giving me a shot and just saying I'm one of the only non-AI SpongeBob sleep channels on YouTube. Clearly, a lot of people really like this type of sleep content. And with my channel, you at least know that I'm making like new, genuine content and I'm not using AI at all. What I do, guys, is I make like 25-minute videos and then I stitch them all together into these big compilations. So yeah, if you want to support a SpongeBob creator that does not use AI, consider subscribing. I'll really appreciate it. Also, if my voice is a little shaky today, guys, I'm like so sick right now. I don't think I've been this sick in a long time, so wish me luck. But let's head over to that other episode. The episode Squeaky Boots may look like a simple Mr. Krabs story on the surface, but it actually has a surprising amount of production history behind it. I mean, even the title of the episode had a small change before the episode aired, as in some pieces of production art, the episode was originally spelled differently, with Squeaky being spelled with 2 E's, instead of the correct spelling with an A. It's not like a massive difference, like I doubt you or anybody really cares, but it's the kind of early production details that make me happy. I gotta talk about them, okay? But yeah, by the time the episode aired, the spelling had been corrected, but that alternate title still survives through old production materials, which we'll be talking about more later. But before we get into the episode's normal trivia, the normal stuff I normally talk about, there is one random piece of SpongeBob history connected to Squeaky Boots that is honestly more interesting than you would expect. Like, I went down a rabbit hole to figure all of this out. But this episode was actually a part of the Nickelodeon Smell-O-Vision TV block, which is such a perfect late 90s idea. The basic concept was that Nickelodeon teamed up with Post and launched scratch and sniff stickers inside boxes of certain Post products, especially cereals, which were huge with kids at the time. Except my mom never let me get the good ones, like ever. I don't know if anybody else dealt with this. I could never get Corn Pops or like Frosted Flakes. I'd have to get the no-name versions because I grew up very poor. But yeah, you'd find these scratch and sniff stickers in these Post products like cereals. And it was basically all a promotional tactic. Kids would then watch this Smell-O-Vision TV block, which would take place from like 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. and special versions of Nickelodeon shows would play here, which had these numbered symbols edited in. And when this symbol would show up, you as a viewer would basically scratch the sticker, and the smell from the sticker was supposed to match up with whatever was happening in the episode on screen. It was basically like interactive TV, but with cereal box stickers. Now, from a marketing standpoint, it was actually kind of genius, as if you were a kid watching Nickelodeon, this gave you a reason to ask your parents to buy Post cereal so that you could take part in the event. And then on the flip side, if you were a kid who already got the stickers from a cereal box, it gave you a reason and like gave you incentive to tune into Nickelodeon at that exact time where the Smell-O-Vision TV block aired. Each show selected for the block had an episode tied to one of these scratch and sniff moments, and the SpongeBob episode was Squeaky Boots, with the sticker intended to be used when Mr. Krabs drops the boots into the French fry oil. If you scratched the sticker during that scene, it was supposed to smell like French fries. So some interesting trivia for you there, but what makes this even stranger is that this sniffing symbol that would appear during these episodes to signal the stickers, right? This was actually included in the final cut of the episode, like it was mixed in with the animation, and it wasn't added in post. And because of that, this symbol stayed in the airings of Squeaky Boots for years after the Smell-O-Vision block ended, nearly 3 years, and it wasn't removed until like 2002. So for a while, kids watching reruns of this episode were remember still seeing this random symbol on the screen with no idea that it was originally a part of that scratch and sniff promotion. I'll probably do a full video on this because there's been many other instances where Nickelodeon has tried to use this, I was gonna say technology, but this just marketing stunt. So stay tuned for that. But moving into the episode itself, Squeaky Boots is a pretty big one because it introduces Pearl Krabs to the series. As season 1 went on, the show was still slowly adding major characters to the cast, and Pearl was one of the last main characters introduced during season 1. Her debut immediately expands Mr. Krabs beyond just being SpongeBob's greedy boss, as now we know that he's also a father, and he isn't exactly the most generous one. In this episode, it's Pearl's birthday, and instead of buying her something she would actually want, Mr. Krabs gives her a pair of old dirty boots because he's too cheap to get her a proper gift. But yeah, this was Pearl's introduction, and it showed just how dramatic of a character she is. But honestly, it's hard to blame her. If your dad was Mr. Krabs, you'd probably be dramatic too. I mean, this is the same guy who in a later episode tries to pass off ketchup and crackers as pizza for Pearl and her friends in the episode The Slumber Party. So Squeaky Boots gives us an early look at the kind of cheap parenting Pearl has to deal with. Now, a fun fact about Pearl is that even though she was the last main character introduced to viewers in season 1, she was actually the second main character Steven Hillenburg created for the series. In one of his earliest sketches of the main SpongeBob cast, Pearl looks a little bit different, as you can see here. For one, she has a tail, and her hair was styled in pigtails. That early design obviously changed by the time she appeared in the show, but it is interesting to see what Hillenburg had been thinking about her very early on. And if you've ever wondered why Mr. Krabs has a whale for a daughter, considering he's like literally a crab, how did this even happen? Well, Hillenburg explained that he intentionally made Pearl a whale instead of a crab, because he wanted every main character to be a different species, as that choice gave the cast more visual variety, which definitely is true. I mean, if you look at the main cast of SpongeBob, like they're all widely different characters. So yeah, you know, a crab father and a whale daughter might not make the most biological sense, but design-wise, Pearl immediately stands out as a character. Pearl's introduction also meant the show needed to introduce some teenage background characters around her for this episode. So in this episode, we meet part of Pearl's friend group, including Incidental 11 and Cindy, also known as Teen 7. Pearl has 4 friends in this group, and 2 of them, Susie and Incidental 8, had already appeared in Ripped Pants, in terms of air date order. But because Squeaky Boots was produced before Ripped Pants, these teen characters were likely developed together around this point. In terms of the aired episode order though, Squeaky Boots is where we first ever see Incidental 11 and Cindy. And yeah, these characters were clearly made to help sell Pearl as a teenager. I mean, they look younger, and they make Pearl feel like she actually has a social life outside of being Mr. Krabs' daughter. And just saying, all 4 of these characters, including Incidental 11 and Cindy, have all appeared many times over the years. But moving on, Incidental 11 also has another interesting detail attached to her, as she was one of the first weirdo incidental characters introduced in the series. And no, that's not me calling her a weirdo, that's literally the term that the production team would use. A lot of people don't know this, but the production team actually classified incidental characters into different types, and over time, those categories have grown a lot. But one of the earliest categories was the weirdo group. And if we take a look at the original first incidental model sheet, Incidental 11 was actually the second one included. Now just saying, I honestly do not think she looks that weird compared to some later SpongeBob background characters, but she definitely has a different silhouette from a lot of the more standard season 1 fish. But yeah, it's not me calling her a weirdo. Get mad at Steven Hillenburg, he's the one who thinks she's a weirdo. But let's also talk about Mr. Krabs a little bit more, as this episode is also a big expansion for the Mr. Krabs character himself. Before this, he was mostly defined by the Krusty Krab and his obsession with money, but Squeaky Boots gives him a personal life outside of the restaurant by showing him as Pearl's father. And because of that, this episode also introduces the Krabs family home for the very first time. As you can see, Mr. Krabs and Pearl live in a giant anchor-shaped house, which is a very SpongeBob design. I mean, come on. The exterior has stayed pretty consistent over the years, but there is one early detail in Squeaky Boots that is not always present later, and that's this chain on the anchor right here, as it would eventually be removed. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, since this was the first real Mr. Krabs focused episode, it makes makes sense that the art team had to give him like a home where he would live. So yeah, the Krusty Krab is where he works, but the Anchor House gives him a place in Bikini Bottom as an actual resident. And it also just looks cool, like living in a giant anchor, like, you know, it's pretty cool. Like, I'm practically married at this point to my girlfriend, but imagine you go on a date with a girl and you like bring her back to your anchor-shaped home, like, you know, it's pretty cool. But let's move on, as we just talked about Mr. Krabs and Pearl a bunch, but let's talk about SpongeBob a little bit, more specifically his bedroom. And this is something I've discussed many times already in all of these season 1 videos, but this is probably the final piece of the whole blanket color mess from early season 1. As Squeaky Boots is the last episode where SpongeBob's blanket is this blue color right here. And let me explain, because like I said, this gets a little complicated, but I figured it all out, okay? This is gonna make sense now. Because pretty much what happened here is that season 1 did not air in production order, right? Like if we go to the Spongepedia episode list and we see the order of how each episode aired, this is just the order that the production team chose to air the episodes in. It isn't the order that the episodes were actually made. So because of this, when you watch season 1 in broadcast order, SpongeBob's blanket color can seem to change back and forth between blue and purple. And what really happened here is that some of the earlier completed episodes still used the blue blanket, while later produced episodes had already switched to the purple version. But since the episodes aired out of order, it kind of messes everything up, because in one episode it'll be blue, and then in the next episode it'll be purple. When in reality what happened is when the production team was producing all of the episodes, the first couple of episodes they made the blanket look like this, and then eventually they decided to use purple. But again, because everything aired out of order, it just kind of goes back and forth and seems like this big inconsistency. But when you understand how the production was done for season 1, it actually makes like a ton of sense what happened here. It's actually not that crazy, but it is a little complicated to figure out. But the main point here is Squeaky Boots is the last time where this mix-up occurs, and the last time that his blanket is ever going to be blue, intentionally at least. All right, I'm almost done with this episode, but there's a couple of other just random things I want to go over, as there's one scene from this episode that actually became an issue in some later airings. At one point in this episode, SpongeBob is so distracted and miserable because of the Squeaky Boots that he accidentally fries his face on the grill. Now, in recent UK and Ireland airings, this scene has been cut entirely, most likely because it shows a dangerous action that kids could potentially imitate. So I understand the logic, but it is also a little funny when you compare it to other SpongeBob scenes that are just as extreme, or if not like worse. For example, Squidward has been like deep fried, exploded, crushed, and abused in many ways that are much more intense. And plenty of those scenes still air, but for whatever reason, SpongeBob pressing his face into a hot grill was apparently too much for this episode. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I personally think that it's not that big of a deal. But another thing I want to talk about is near the end of Squeaky Boots, there's this shot right here of Mr. Krabs and Pearl driving off into a unique background landscape. It seems like a random ending shot at first, and you're probably wondering why Cartoon Corey is even talking about this, right? Like, what's up, Corey? But years later, the show actually referenced this exact shot in the episode Ain't That the Tooth. In that episode, Dorsal Dan tries to escape from the police. And if we look at this shot right here, it is like pretty much identical to the one from Squeaky Boots, just with a different time of day. Now, what makes this like interesting is that the location had only really been seen in this episode Squeaky Boots before, and it isn't some famous reoccurring setting or like a meme or anything like that. So the fact that the art team brought it back for such a specific visual years later is very random, but also kind of awesome at the same time, right? Okay, and to end things off, because holy cow, I've talked about this episode a lot, and I'm just gonna say I'm taking zero credit for this part. I'm straight up taking this part from the wiki, all right? Like a lot of the other stuff I've talked about, guys, I've had to deep dive into it and research it. I've had to confirm it, you know what I mean? I've had to watch the whole episode and find everything that they're talking about, but this one is straight from the wiki. But this episode takes a lot of inspiration from Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, where a character commits a crime and becomes so overwhelmed by guilt and paranoia that he eventually confesses. Mr. Krabs' crime is obviously much smaller, since he secretly gets rid of the boots by hiding them under the floorboards. But the structure is very similar. He keeps hearing the squeaking, becomes more and more unhinged, and finally exposes what he did. Now, the connection is made even more obvious when Mr. Krabs refers to the squeaking of the hideous boots, echoing the famous heart imagery from Poe's story. And just saying, this reference was even mentioned in the Pitch Bible, so it was clearly intentional. This isn't like a theory, so just saying, that part isn't in the wiki. I confirmed that part myself. But yeah, as you've seen, holy fucking cow, there is a lot of trivia and stuff in this episode. Hopefully that F-bomb was okay. You guys told me in the comments of the last video that saying like shit is okay. If the F-bomb was too much, let me know, because I might be pushing it with that. The episode Plankton is one of the most important season 1 episodes because it introduces 2 characters who would eventually become a massive part of SpongeBob history, them being Sheldon J. Plankton and of course his computer wife Karen. Now, before this episode Plankton, the Krusty Krab didn't really have a main villain. Well, that changed in this episode. And though the character starts off tiny, both literally and in terms of his early role within the show, this episode sets up the entire Chum Bucket versus Krusty Krab dynamic. But a funny detail about Plankton's creation is that Doug Lawrence, the voice actor who ended up playing him, originally wanted to use that now iconic Plankton voice for SpongeBob instead.
I know you got it. I know you got the secret formula on you right now. So hand it over. Hand it over.
When he was first brought in for voices, he auditioned for SpongeBob and specifically used the Plankton voice during his pitch, which is just crazy to imagine. Imagine SpongeBob with Plankton's voice.
I came in auditioning for that, and I did the Plankton's voice for the SpongeBob character. Because it was a voice that I was in, this deep voice that I used to do, that I used to make Tom laugh. And I never really had him as a voice, I just did him sometimes in the Rocco records. And Tom Kenny would always laugh when I would do that.
Like I said, it's crazy to even imagine like a world where SpongeBob uses Plankton's voice. But yeah, this didn't end up happening, as most of you know. After Stephen Hillenburg heard Doug Lawrence's pitch tape, he immediately felt that the voice was actually more suited for Plankton. But Nickelodeon themselves apparently were not fully convinced at first, with Doug stating on many occasions that Stephen Hillenburg really had to push for him and prove that he was right for the role, which again is crazy because this dude just nails Plankton's voice. So imagine if somebody else voiced the character.
So we figured this is, it should be a slam dunk. Instead it was, we're still, we saw you want to hire Doug, but Steve would go, can you write something and record it and send it to New York? I kept writing things at my desk.
That's Plankton.
This fast, writing down stuff for me to say, printing it out, running downstairs, recording it, and they're sending it to New York, and I did that a few times. And they said, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I don't know. We're still not sure. We're still on the fence here about Doug. We still think it'd be best to get a famous person playing this.
In hindsight, Hillenburg's instinct was obviously right. I mean, Doug's voice gives Plankton this perfect mix of anger and honestly ego. Like the voice sounds like your typical ego maniac character, which is exactly what the Plankton character needed. But something even more interesting about Plankton in this episode itself is that even after Plankton found the right voice, the character was still not guaranteed to become a major or main character that's a part of the main SpongeBob cast. As a matter of fact, Stephen Hillenburg only wanted to use Plankton as a one-off, or at most a very occasional character. And this was due to the concern that Plankton's stories could become repetitive and predictable. I mean, if every single SpongeBob episode was just him trying to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula, it would get pretty old very fast. So because of that, during season 1, Hillenburg actually demoted Plankton from a main character to more of a minor role. But Doug Lawrence had a big hand in changing that. And this was due to the fact that Lawrence was not just Plankton's voice actor, he was also a writer on the show, and he really liked the character. In a 2015 newspaper interview, he explained that Plankton was only supposed to appear in 1 or 2 episodes, but because he was a writer and enjoyed the character so much, he started coming up with more ideas for him. And this eventually proved to Stephen Hillenburg that Plankton could maybe work more than just a one-time gag. Here's a random fact for you guys, but if you go to the credits of the first SpongeBob movie, the 2004 one, this was actually the first time that the main cast past was actually highlighted in the credits. And if we look, this was also the first time that Plankton and Karen were considered as main characters. But it's not all about Plankton. We also gotta talk about Karen, as Plankton would not nearly be as entertaining without her. In this first episode giving her her first appearance, Karen is not really the character that fans know today. She's introduced as Plankton's waterproof computer system, and at this point, she's not even treated as his wife yet. And this is because originally, Karen was planned to be more like a computer component that could be attached to Plankton's inventions. And that's actually how she functions in this episode. For example, when Plankton controls SpongeBob and tries to scan the ingredients of the Krabby Patty, Karen is basically the part of the machine doing the scanning, as you can see in this clip right here.
Seaweed, 50% sea, 50% weed.
Like I said, it's a very different Karen. She isn't arguing with Plankton, and honestly, she's closer to like a text-to-speech program than an actual character. But as we all know, this would be refined over the years. Eventually, Karen becomes Plankton's wife, and honestly, the smarter half of most of his plans. She isn't just a computer, but she's now also his nagging wife who feeds him holographic meatloaf and also assists in all of his nefarious plans. And this was all thanks to Doug Lawrence. As once Lawrence decided that Plankton and Karen should basically be an inseparable duo, Karen's role started evolving to what I was just talking about, her being Plankton's wife. But I am kind of rambling here because none of that is really present in this episode Plankton, at least not yet. But it's cool to see this early version of the character before she evolved into what we know today. And also, looking back at this early version kind of makes it easier to understand why Steven Hillenburg may have been worried that Plankton's stories would become repetitive, considering that the actual dynamic between Plankton and Karen was not even figured out yet. But yeah, let's move on from this because I've spent a lot of time on the origins of Plankton and Karen here. But this episode itself also has a bunch of trivia and weird details that I'd like to point out. And one of them happens right at the start, when SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs laugh together at the Krusty Krab. As SpongeBob's laugh here sounds like a variant of the iconic laugh that we all know. But at the same time, it's not really the same. Here, take a listen. As you heard, it has a slightly different pitch in delivery, almost as if the series was still experimenting on what SpongeBob's laugh should actually sound like. Which makes sense considering, SpongeBob's laugh would become one of the most recognizable sounds in like the entire cartoon universe, but not this version of it. This version of it just sounds weird. I'm gonna play the clip again and just listen to this.
Enough, lad. It wasn't that funny. Get back to work!
Now, what makes this one even more interesting is that this exact alternate laugh appears as an unused sound file in the game Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. The more familiar laugh, the iconic one that we all know, did make it into the game, which makes it seem like this version was consciously dropped and just scrapped at one point. But also, there's another small one-off design choice later in the episode when SpongeBob goes to sleep. As if we look at his mattress, it actually has flower prints on it now. It's not a big deal, but this is kind of unusual because SpongeBob's mattress has never had these flower prints before this episode. Like, here's a shot of it before this episode, and even after it, it's just never happened again. Which, don't get it twisted, yes, SpongeBob's blanket is the thing that usually has a flower pattern, but not the actual mattress. So this was most likely either a small art team mistake or another case of the production team still experimenting with SpongeBob's room design. Which, as you've seen if you've been watching my videos, season 1 has quite a few moments like this, where a background detail does not fully match up with what would later become the standard in the series. They're not a big deal, but I'm just a nerd and love catching this stuff. But yeah, while SpongeBob's bedroom has that odd mattress detail, Plankton also gives us a couple of important location debuts that actually stayed very consistent over the years. For example, this is the first episode to ever show SpongeBob's kitchen and Squidward's bedroom, both locations that would appear again later on multiple times. And to give the art team credit, they actually stay pretty close to how they look here, which is interesting because a lot of early season 1 locations have small changes before the art team fully locked them in. But these two spaces in particular were already pretty solid from their first appearance. Moving on though, like a lot of classic season 1 episodes, Plankton has also been referenced years later in newer SpongeBob episodes. For example, in season 16, Patrick's grandfather, Grandpat, quickly travels back to this episode during the time travel special, SpongeBob and Patrick's Timeline Twist Up, which is actually pretty common. Again, again, if you've been watching all of my season 1 content, this episode from season 16 comes up a lot because there's a lot of Easter eggs in it to season 1. But yeah, it just shows how important and iconic this episode actually is. But we're not done yet. I still got some more interesting trivia about this one, as the episode has even appeared outside of the SpongeBob cartoon itself. Believe it or not, in a Big Bang Theory episode, the character Sheldon is seen watching this exact episode Plankton on his phone. It's specifically the scene where SpongeBob is being controlled by Plankton and breaks through this wall in Squidward's house. So talk about a random cameo, but also it's kind of really funny if you think about it that a character named Sheldon is watching an episode about Sheldon Plankton. Also though, a very quick clip from this episode was also used in a 2010 Chia Pet commercial.
Chia Pets, the pottery that grows. And now there's the Chia Gnome. Chia SpongeBob.
Now, one last random detail I want to talk about is small enough that most people would never even notice it, but it's still kind of interesting. And this one I'm going to give complete credit to the SpongeBob wiki for. A lot of these other ones I had to do research on my own to confirm it all and add to it, but this one detail is straight from the wiki, and shout out to the SpongeBob Wikipedia or Spongepedia admins for finding this because it's crazy. But in this episode Plankton, the sesame seeds on the Krabby Patty buns are colored white, as you can see here. But this is a weird inconsistency in season 1, as in most season 1 episodes and even some early season 2 episodes, the sesame seeds are usually black. If we head over to the episode Help Wanted, we can see that those seeds are clearly black right here. But in this episode, they randomly appear as white, so I'm not sure why. This was most likely the art team not really landing on a permanent choice for the Krabby Patties, but it's also that they probably didn't expect any nerds like me or the SpongeBob fandom admins to find something like this. So I think we can all agree that we all need to touch grass. But hey, at least now you know this fun fact about the poppy seeds with Krabby Patties. When it comes to the episode Reef Blower, the second SpongeBob episode ever, there aren't many interesting details about it, but the most notable things are about its length and the fact that it features no dialogue. So if you've ever wondered why this episode is completely silent and is so short, well, I'm about to explain it. Let's find out. This is actually the shortest episode to date, at only 2 minutes and 50 seconds. And I've always wondered if having Help Wanted, Reef Blowers, and Tea at the Tree Dome as 3 separate segments in one episode was intentional. As you guys know, SpongeBob episodes are usually 2 separate episodes put together into one, but the very first episode has 3 segments. But it turns out that the random mini episode Reef Blower, in between Help Wanted and Tea at the Tree Dome, was actually made due to Help Wanted only running for 8 minutes. It was supposed to hit 11 minutes. That way it could be paired with Tea at the Tree Dome, another 11-minute segment, bringing the first episode to a total of 22 minutes, the ideal length for a cartoon on television at the time. But because Help Wanted was only 8 minutes long, a random shorter episode was used to fill the gap. So if you have ever wondered why this episode is so short, it wasn't entirely intentional. It was done for a very specific reason, and that was just to make sure that the first episode hit 22 minutes. Moving on though, the more important detail is why this episode was completely silent, since it's the only episode to feature no spoken dialogue, other than Dream Hoppers, I guess. This was something that I always wondered about since it's so random and never happened again until years later. Now, it was once rumored to be because the studio's audio equipment broke. However, on June 10th, 2022, former crew member Jay Lender confirmed on Twitter that the true reason why was due to Reef Blowers and Help Wanted being produced separately. At the time, there were rules in place for this, as the Screen Actors Guild rules mandated paying the actors a second set of session fees, even though Reef Blowers was only a 2-minute episode. This would have cost around $2,500 USD at the time of production. So to keep things cheaper, the episode was made entirely silent. So yeah, the entire episode was made to save money, and it being silent and shorter wasn't some stylistic decision. But an even bigger fact regarding this episode is that it actually featured the first ever appearance of an incidental character. For one, it served as the debut of fan favorite Fred, who would go on to become more of a supporting character and honestly less of a background character as the series progressed. But it also saw the first appearance of incidental number 3, this dude right here, who I'll admit isn't as iconic as Fred, but is another background character that's still used to this very day. Also, one other fact that I briefly touched on when talking about Help Wanted is that SpongeBob and Squidward's designs are pretty different in this episode compared to Help Wanted, and these newer designs designs would go on to be used for every season 1 episode to follow. I've already explained it before, but this was due to Help Wanted being developed much earlier than Reef Blower, since it was the pilot episode. But this episode, Reef Blower, was made once the show was fully picked up by Nickelodeon. So yeah, like I said, there isn't a ton of interesting facts or trivia about Reef Blower, but at least you guys know why the episode is so short and why it was silent. Because again, as a kid, I always wondered why, and even as an adult now who makes SpongeBob videos all the time, I've always wondered why, but we have the answer. Season 1's Ripped Pants is one of the earliest SpongeBob episodes that really shows how much bigger Bikini Bottom was becoming. This episode takes place at Goo Lagoon, which means that the episode needed a lot more background characters than the episodes set around SpongeBob's house or the Krusty Krab. And because of that, this episode actually served as the debut of a huge number of incidental characters. Now, we gotta remember that before this, we only knew of like 2 or 3 incidental characters. We knew of Fred in Incidental 3, but this episode expanded on this concept a ton, introducing like 50 plus new incidentals, including Incidental 2, Incidental number 4, and all of them all the way up until Incidental number 49. I'm showing a bunch of their different model sheets on screen right now, and just yeah, it might not seem like a big deal right now because we're in the modern day and we see these characters all the time, but this was the first time that the art team ever drew these characters for an episode. It's crazy to think that there was a time before these characters were even created, as a lot of these background fish are still used to this very day. Some of them even have names and like have full-on episodes about them, which is pretty crazy because many of them were originally just created to fill out a beach crowd. Since Ripped Pants has so many public scenes, especially with SpongeBob embarrassing himself in front of everybody, the art team needed a much bigger cast of random Bikini Bottomites. For example, this scene right here.
You okay, SpongeBob?
I guess so. Except I ripped my pants.
The whole point of this episode is that SpongeBob rips his pants. He realizes that he gets attention for it, and then he just keeps on chasing that same reaction. And this only actually would work in this episode with an actual crowd of different characters watching him. Even with all of those new designs though, the art team still did not have enough unique background fish to avoid repeats completely, and thus there are a few moments where duplicated characters can be spotted. I mean, it's a very small detail that only a nerd like me would notice, but it is funny considering all of the new characters that were made just for this episode. Moving on though, the actual ripped pants gag from this episode ended up becoming one of the most iconic moments from early SpongeBob. And I can confirm this as a young millennial who grew up during the era when this episode aired on TV. When I'd go to school, this was a massive joke that people would reference.
You know what would go good with that?
No, what?
Ripped pants.
Well, this moment became memorable enough that Fisher-Price eventually made a toy based entirely on this one episode. The toy features SpongeBob with pants that can rip, of course, and the toy also plays the Ripped Pants song. It's interesting because this is a very specific thing to turn into merchandise, but I mean, it just shows how recognizable this episode actually became. And one interesting detail about this toy is that the song from the episode is not actually performed in the same way that it's performed in the actual episode.
I know I shouldn't mope around, I shouldn't curse.
For one, in the actual episode, the song isn't sung by SpongeBob's voice actor Tom Kenny, and it's instead sung by Peter S. But in the toy version, Tom Kenny sings it for some reason.
I know I shouldn't mope around, I shouldn't curse, but the pain feels so much worse. Just wind it up with none of the lot last night, and I turned on the sign, for getting it back.
Nonetheless, it's an interesting piece of SpongeBob history, and here's the commercial. Let's give it a watch.
I need a tailored ripped pants SpongeBob. I'll take a banana split and some ripped pants.
Speaking of that Ripped Pants song, a fun fact is that the song itself is a very obvious reference to the Beach Boys, which I mean does make sense considering the episode does take place at Goo Lagoon. It's not a perfect match, but the song is very similar to the 1963 Beach Boys song Be True to Your School, and I'd say that this was most likely intentional.
When Big Larry came round just to put him down.
Like I already said, the episode is built around a beach setting, with fish surfing in the background, so a Beach Boys style song was like kind of perfect for the episode. Ripped Pants is also the first episode for a few major SpongeBob staples, so let's dive into that, as this episode served as the debut of one of SpongeBob's most signature things, that being his signature laugh.
Did you order 20 cases of Ripped Pants? Ah!
You know, it's crazy to think that there were a couple of episodes before this where this laugh was not a part of the show yet.
But you haven't got it yet, have ye, bugs?
But yeah, this episode, Ripped Pants, marked the introduction of that famous laugh, which, I mean, come on, would go on to be one of these sounds most associated with the entire series.
They love it.
But on top of that, this episode also served as the debut of the Goo Lagoon location, a spot that would go on to become one of the show's most common locations, appearing in a lot of later episodes whenever the writers needed a public outdoor setting. But back in Ripped Pants, the location was still brand new. The art team had to figure out what a beach in Bikini Bottom would even look like, and there's actually been concept art released for this episode showing how they developed the location. For example, this shot shows the waves in the water. Moving on, there's also a small continuity issue that comes from this episode, and it has to do with SpongeBob's surfing ability. Now, in Ripped Pants, SpongeBob is clearly shown surfing, as you can see in this shot right here. So based on this episode, SpongeBob can surf, or he at least knows what surfing is. Also, during this earlier era of the show, we see SpongeBob do shell surfing many times.
Stop naming moves after me.
Everybody's an idiot except for me.
Well, it's true.
So just to reiterate, the idea of SpongeBob being able to surf has already been in the show for a while. Like, my boy SpongeBob is like a sponge version of Tony Hawk. He can surf and he can skate. But years later, in SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One, the writers made a little bit of a mistake, and they treat SpongeBob as if he does not know how to surf. It's not a big deal, but it does create a pretty weird continuity error. And I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously SpongeBob continuity has never been perfect, and the show often cares way more about the joke or the gags than keeping every old detail consistent. But this one just kind of stood out, and I wanted to highlight it. It also shows a point that I make often, that it seems a lot of the later writers of the show, after Steven Hillenburg left the show, were not as educated on SpongeBob lore. But as I've said many times, I mean, the idea of SpongeBob lore is already kind of ridiculous, right? But another reason that this episode is worth talking about is that Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, has said that it's one of his favorite SpongeBob episodes. This is how you guys know that I go really hard, because for this we need to use a DVD special feature, the Backstage Pants DVD featurette, where Tom Kenny goes into detail about how he feels about the episode. Rather than me explaining the whole thing, here, take a listen for yourself. Here's the actual clip from the DVD.
I think one of my favorite episodes is Ripped Pants, the one where SpongeBob rips his pants by mistake and gets a laugh out of it, and then overplays his hand by doing it one too many times, and people get bored with it, and he realizes that jokes have a lifespan. And I think that's something that happened to me a lot as a kid, where you would accidentally hit on something that was really funny, and you would just do it over and over and over again. And when people stopped laughing, it was kind of like a slap in the face. It kind of hurt. And then you had to go out and find something else stupid to get attention and laughs from your fellow classmates.
Okay, I have one more thing to cover about this episode, and it's just to show how iconic Ripped Pants has really become, as the episode was even referenced 25 plus years later in SpongeBob and Patrick's Timeline Twist-Up.
Well, you'll definitely remember when I ripped my pants.
You sure you remember it? Because that looks like my dad ripped your pants.
That's odd.
During this time travel special, Patrick's father travels back to this very episode, Ripped Pants, which is a pretty clear nostalgia pull, but this says a lot about the episode. As it's not just me, even Nickelodeon knows how iconic it actually is, even referencing it so many years later, so yeah. Sandy's Rocket is a really interesting season 1 episode because on the surface, it's mostly remembered as a SpongeBob SpongeBob and Patrick's story, right? I mean, the main plot is about them sneaking into Sandy's rocket, accidentally launching themselves, and then kidnapping everyone around Bikini Bottom like they're psychos, since they think they're aliens. But before the episode focuses so much on SpongeBob and Patrick, there was a very important moment earlier in this episode, as it gave Sandy a really important piece of characterization. In this episode, Sandy builds a fully functional rocket ship and plans to use it for space research, which is a pretty big detail as this was the first episode that really showed Sandy's interest in science.
This isn't for fun. See this? This is science. I don't have time for fun and games, and I don't have time for stowaways.
Later in the series, especially after the first 2004 SpongeBob movie, Sandy being a scientist or really smart would become one of her main characteristic traits, with her being shown building machines and inventing all kinds of crazy technology. But Sandy's rocket is actually the earliest example of that side of her character. Before this, Sandy was mostly defined by being this tough Texan character who was really freaking good at karate.
Well, SpongeBob, take a gander at this.
But this episode added another layer to her, and honestly set up one of her most important traits as a character in my opinion. I'm gonna move on to other Easter eggs, don't worry, and other facts, but I mean, really think about it. There are so many SpongeBob episodes that are very dependent on this trait of Sandy. Moving on though, SpongeBob and Patrick end up messing with Sandy's rocket and launch it into space. And during the rocket's takeoff, there's a quick little gag where Patrick is seen playing a video game on one of the screens inside the rocket. He's having a good old time.
This is Sandy's big rocket, not some kind of fun house.
Now, it's a very small moment, but if you listen closely, the sound effects that play during the scene are extremely similar to the Game Boy version of Tetris. For example, take a listen for yourself.
This is Sandy's big rocket, not some kind of fun house.
This is a really cool detail, and it's interesting as at this time when this episode was in production, in the very late 90s, Tetris was like a massive game at the time. I'm pretty sure it was actually like the best-selling Game Boy game of all time at the time. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people who were like developing and producing this episode were playing Tetris on the Game Boy at the time when making the episode. But who knows, that's just a theory. But this episode kept on sneaking in references as it went on. For example, moments after takeoff, there's a really fun scene where SpongeBob and Patrick become weightless due to gravity. And there's actually an Easter egg here, so let's roll the clip and let's see if you guys can spot it.
Hey, we stopped falling!
Look, we're in space now.
There's a book that floats by with 2001 written on its cover, this book right here. And if you're a younger dude, you probably won't get it, but this is actually a reference to the 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Honestly, one of the most famous science fiction movies ever made. It's a very fitting reference considering this entire episode is about space and going to space, so yeah, it was a fun reference. But after the rocket returns to Bikini Bottom, the episode shifts a little bit. SpongeBob and Patrick believe that they have landed on the moon, even though they are actually right back where they started, in Bikini Bottom.
It sure looks a lot like home.
Can't you see this is all a trick? The aliens are projecting our memories onto the environment. You're trying to confuse us, Patrick.
I love you, SpongeBob and Patrick, but you guys are bozo sometimes. Like, could you not tell that you were in Bikini Bottom? Like, you can literally see your house in some shots, SpongeBob. But because of their mix-up, they start assuming that because they're on the moon, that everybody they're seeing in town is actually an alien pretending to be a normal Bikini Bottom resident. So this leads to them capturing a bunch of familiar-looking fish. And this is where a pretty underrated character detail comes in. Now, who remembers the character Flats the Flounder?
Hi, SpongeBob. I'm gonna kick your butt.
A lot of people mistakenly think that this character first appeared back in the episode The Bully, since that is his most famous episode, and it's very nostalgic for a lot of fans.
Dad, what are you doing?
Nothing, son.
What did I tell you about talking to strangers?
Now he's gonna kick my butt.
Well, it turns out that Flats the Flounder's actual first appearance was in Sandy's rocket, something that I completely missed as a kid. And it's because it's during a very quick shot, as he shows up during the sequence where SpongeBob and Patrick do a montage of rounding up different Bikini Bottomites and trapping them. So yeah, a fun fact here that Flats the Flounder actually debuted in this episode. And again, it's something that I feel like a lot of fans don't realize. Moving on though, to capture everyone, SpongeBob and Patrick use use these net guns right here. And you'd think that they'd just stay in this episode, but they actually were featured outside of the actual TV show. And here's why. When developers make SpongeBob video games or any licensed video game, they're usually given art assets and reference material from the show so that the games can pull from actual episodes. And a fun example of this is that the net guns from this episode, Sandy's Rocket, were later used in 2 different SpongeBob video games, Legend of the Lost Spatula and Operation Krabby Patty. And the reason this is interesting is that this is a very specific reference. I mean, the net guns are not some like reoccurring SpongeBob item or object. They're like literally only tied to this episode, so seeing them represented in other forms of SpongeBob media is cool and it's world building. You know what I mean? If we see something in one episode, it could appear in another form of SpongeBob media. For example, those boots that Sandy made in the episode Stuck on the Roof, we talked about it before, but those were a random item exclusive to that episode, but they were eventually used in a video game, so cool stuff. Let's get back to the plot though, as just before SpongeBob and Patrick capture Squidward, they analyze him because they think he is an alien. But more importantly, this scene and section of the episode includes a few clear nods to the 1979 film Alien. The most obvious one happens when Squidward tentacles attaches to Patrick's helmet.
Pardon my French, but get this thing off me!
For those of you who don't know, this is actually a direct reference to the facehuggers who were featured in the Alien franchise. Now, this joke works because Squidward is not doing anything alien at all. He's just being typical old Squidward. And I mean, what better episode to include a reference to the Alien movies than an episode where SpongeBob and Patrick think that everybody are literally aliens? Which again, they are so dumb for falling for this. I'd expect this from Patrick, but not from SpongeBob. There's also another reference to the Alien films in this scene, and it has to do with Squidward's water bottle, as the way that SpongeBob's hands appear under the light inside the bottle looks really similar to how the eggs appeared in the Alien movies. Also though, respect to the writers and the art team for including like a reference to a dark sci-fi horror movie within a kid show. But yeah, there's another reference in this episode, so let's keep it moving, guys. There's a lot of them in this one episode. Now, as we mentioned, SpongeBob and Patrick briefly go to space during the first half of this episode, but by the end of the episode, SpongeBob goes to space again. And there's this really cool shot where SpongeBob looks out of the window towards the moon, and we get this view of Earth. Now, you need to be a total nerd to even catch something like this, and to be honest with you, I didn't even notice it. I had to use like Wikipedia to learn. But this shot from the episode looks almost identical to the famous Earthrise photograph. This photo was taken by astronaut William Anders on December 24th, 1968, during the Apollo 8 mission, where they went to the moon. And honestly, it's become one of the most iconic images ever captured from space, so it makes sense that they'd reference it in this episode. As you just seen, there are a ton of really cool references in this episode, but let's head over to another episode with even crazier Easter eggs, facts, and trivia. Now, the episode Boating School does not have a ton of like hidden production trivia, especially compared to other season 1 episodes, but it does have some very important details. And I mean, the biggest reason that this episode matters is that it introduced Mrs. Puff and her boating school, one of the most important supporting characters throughout the entire series. Now, what makes her debut even more interesting is that Mrs. Puff was not just created because the writers randomly wanted SpongeBob to have a teacher. Her creation was actually tied to Nickelodeon's early concerns about the show. After Steven Hillenburg pitched the pilot episode, Nickelodeon executives did not immediately greenlight the series exactly as he presented it. And one of the biggest changes they wanted was for SpongeBob to be a child who went to school, with every episode focusing on his school life. And I mean, that would have made the series completely different from what it became. Well, Hillenburg did not want to turn SpongeBob into that kind of show, so Mrs. Puff and her boating school became the compromise, as SpongeBob could technically attend a school, which technically gave Nickelodeon what they asked for. But at the same time, the series did not have to become completely centered around classrooms or homework, so yeah, it was a very good compromise. And just saying, I actually found this concept art of Mrs. Puff right here, giving us a look at one of the earliest versions of the character. But what's even crazier crazier is that SpongeBob being unable to drive was not actually a part of the original plan either. Today, SpongeBob failing his boating test is one of the most familiar running jokes in the entire series. But according to the June 2003 issue of Nickelodeon magazine, Hillenburg had not yet come up with the idea that Mrs. Puff and SpongeBob would be stuck in an endless quest to get him a driver's license. And as a matter of fact, some early development artwork even showed SpongeBob driving a submarine-like vehicle with no trouble at all. The original theme song also shows him driving several different vehicles, which again just proves the point that originally this concept of SpongeBob not being able to drive boats, as seen in this episode Boating School, was not the original plan whatsoever. Moving on though, since Boating School introduced a brand new location in this episode, the art team also had to put a lot of work into designing it properly. And we can see this as this is one of the first episodes where model sheets and reference drawings were made for almost every single shot of this new setting. I mean, Mrs. Puff's boating school was not just a quick background that appeared once and disappeared. It needed to function as a legit location that the series could return to. So all of these different model sheets I'm showing right here were made to make sure that the location had a consistent design. And I imagine it especially helped the animators. Also though, this episode introduced one of the most famous running gags throughout the entire show, and that's Fred yelling, "My leg," after a crash.
Rev up those fryers, cause I am sure hungry for one. Help! Help!
My leg! Can't you see we're closed?
Now, Fred had appeared before this as a regular incidental character, and he'd continue to be more of a background character for many years after this, but this episode is where his signature catchphrase really begins. It's the first time he ever does it.
Oh, SpongeBob! Why?
This gag became one of those SpongeBob jokes that could show up almost anywhere. And I guarantee you, if you go like outside right now and you just go in a group of people and you yell it like that, someone will laugh and know what you're referencing. But yeah, it's cool to see where it originally came from. And it's crazy to think that this one gag eventually led to an entire episode about Fred and him breaking his leg. But as you guys know, I love to talk about locations in SpongeBob and how they change episode to episode. So let's talk about that, as this episode also adds a few details to SpongeBob's pineapple home. One of the smaller but still noticeable additions is the first appearance of SpongeBob's library. The show had already shown different parts of his home before, but this episode expands on the interior a little bit more, a location that even appears in some video games and media outside of the actual show, for example in Battle for Bikini Bottom. As for background characters, Boating School did not introduce nearly as many incidentals as episodes like Pickles or Ripped Pants. I've covered those episodes in the past, and as you guys know, they introduced a ton of characters. But Boating School still did add a couple of new faces to Bikini Bottom. But I will admit, they're not the most memorable and they're kind of underwhelming, but incidentals 25, 26, and 50 all made their debuts here. Like I said, they're not the most iconic background characters in the series, and honestly, most fans probably don't even recognize them. But this is an example of season 1 constantly building up the population of Bikini Bottom. But also, there's a weird inconsistency with Mrs. Puff's voice throughout this episode, which does make sense considering this is like literally her first appearance ever. But at one point, she inflates in this episode, as you can see in this clip right here.
Oh, SpongeBob! Why?
Mrs. Puff, I think I cheated.
As you just heard, after Mrs. Puff inflates, she briefly speaks with a deep voice. But what's really weird is later in the episode, when paramedics put her into this ambulance, she speaks with her normal voice, even though she's still puffed up.
Okay, boys, take me away.
The show would keep being inconsistent about this detail for a while. For example, in Sandy's Rocket, Mrs. Puff speaks with a deep voice the entire time that she's inflated. But if we jump over to the episode Pranks-a-Lot, she uses her regular voice even though she's puffed up. Again, as I've said about many other details discussed today, this was most likely just the production team not fully deciding how they want her voice to sound, not fully knowing how they wanted to handle Mrs. Puff's voice. But eventually, by later seasons, they got the hang of it. Now, like a lot of classic season 1 episodes, Boating School also found its way into merchandise and marketing. For example, there's a Lego set called Mrs. Puff's Boating School, which is set number 4982, I believe. At first, I thought maybe it was just a general Mrs. Mrs. Puff's set, but the biggest giveaway is the antenna on SpongeBob's head, which references the part of the episode where SpongeBob and Patrick communicate during the boating exam. So yeah, lots of cool stuff in this episode, guys, and stay tuned as I'm gonna keep on covering season 1. Now, I grew up actually watching SpongeBob on television in the 2000s, and back in the day, I always loved the episode Bubble Stand, but I didn't realize how massive this episode actually became. Now, I'm gonna get into all the trivia, facts, and Easter eggs, but let's talk about the plot for a second so that it all makes sense, as the plot of this episode is basically just SpongeBob setting up a stand outside of his house and charging people 25 cents to blow bubbles.
Hey, Squidward, wanna blow some bubbles? Only 25 cents.
All right, like I would spend a moment of my time blowing bubbles.
Uh-huh.
Squidward, of course, is immediately annoyed by the entire thing, since he's just trying to relax at home, and SpongeBob is outside loudly advertising bubble lessons. But the episode eventually reveals that Squidward himself doesn't actually know how to blow a bubble. And this leads into one of the most famous scenes from the episode, where SpongeBob demonstrates his iconic bubble blowing technique.
First go like this, spin around, stop, double take 3 times. 1, 2, 3, then pelvic thrust. Woo!
You've probably seen it in memes, but if you didn't know the origins, this is where that iconic Bring It Around Town dance comes from. And this scene is honestly one of the main reasons why Bubble Stand stuck around for so long, even in SpongeBob's marketing. As a really interesting fact here is that compared to almost any other episode in seasons 1, 2, or 3, this specific episode has been used in a surprising amount of commercials, especially the bubble blowing scene. For example, a clip of the episode was used in a 2001 Burger King commercial promoting these SpongeBob toys, which I imagine are pretty rare now, just like all of the Pokemon ones they did and those Dragon Ball Z ones. See, I know ball because I'm a real millennial. But yeah, this commercial even references the episode. Here, take a look.
It's all in the technique.
We're not just blowing bubbles, we're making bubble art.
Will you look what the tide dragged in?
That same scene also showed up in other advertisements over the years. For example, a clip of SpongeBob's Bring It Around Town moment was also used in a Nickelodeon fruit snacks commercial, which was probably really nice for Nickelodeon because they own SpongeBob and didn't have to pay for any rights. But yeah, here's the commercial. Man, if you grew up in the 2000s, you guys know that fruit snacks and little gummies like these, like those Scooby Snacks gummies, and all of the other ones were like a major part of lunchtime at school. You guys know what I'm talking about? I remember trading those for other snacks. Another big thing from my childhood was breakfast cereal, and in 2017, Honey Nut Cheerios did a commercial that actually features elements of this episode. What's crazy is that commercial's from 2017, so even years later, after all of the other SpongeBob episodes we had, companies still want to pull from this episode Bubble Stand. This bubble blowing scene also made its way into SpongeBob video games, of course. For example, in the Game Boy Advance version of Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, SpongeBob's Bring It Around Town dance is used as a celebration animation when he completes a tile puzzle. This was like perfect, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of just perfect to use that as a victory dance in a game, so shout out to the developers. Also though, if we take a look at the game Legend of the Lost Spatula for the original Game Boy, that gesture also appears as an idle animation, as you can see here. And if we take a look at the box art for the game and we flip it around to the back, look, we can see that there's art of SpongeBob doing the Bring It Around Town motion on the back cover of the game. So hopefully you guys see why I'm rambling on about this now. Like, this one episode has been used in so many other promotional avenues for Nickelodeon. Like, I mean, for a joke from one of the earliest episodes in the season, it ended up having a surprisingly long shelf life across the franchise, right? I'm pretty sure a scene from this episode even appeared in the movie Zephora. It was that board game movie. It was like pretty much a ripoff of Jumanji, if you guys know what I'm talking about. But let's move on because there's other things I want to talk about regarding this episode other than commercials. As this episode actually created a pretty weird lore issue. During SpongeBob's bubble demonstration, SpongeBob blows several different bubble shapes, and one of them is a butterfly, as you can see here. Now at the time, this was just another example of SpongeBob being weirdly talented at making very detailed bubbles. Like, he's actually really good at this. But the problem comes in the next season with the episode Wormy. Back in that iconic episode, another really good one, SpongeBob does not seem to know what a butterfly is. He acts like he's never even seen one before.
What is that thing?
I don't know, Patrick. But whatever it is, it must have eaten Wormy!
Once Wormy transforms into an actual butterfly, SpongeBob and Patrick are like terrified, thinking it's some monster that's gonna eat their heads off. And this creates somewhat of a minor plot hole, because SpongeBob has already interacted with a butterfly-shaped bubble back in Bubble Stand. Like, the dude literally made the bubble, so he must have known what a butterfly was, right? Of course, it's not a huge continuity-breaking issue, since SpongeBob is a cartoon and isn't necessarily known for perfect consistency, but it's still kind of funny. But another detail that's easy to miss in Bubble Stand happens right at the beginning of the episode, as this is actually the first episode where we've seen Squidward playing his clarinet.
And now for some soothing sounds from Squidward's clarinet. Thank you, thank you.
He plays it while SpongeBob is outside building the stand, and looking back, it was actually like a pretty big deal. I mean, Squidward's clarinet would go on to become one of the most important parts of his character. It's just like Sandy being obsessed with technology, or Mr. Krabs being obsessed with scamming everybody since he loves money so much. Like, Mr. Krabs loves money so much that I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one running all of those AI SpongeBob channels, guys. You know, like Cartoonology, it's probably Mr. Krabs running that up over there. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight this, as again, the clarinet is such a massive part of Squidward's personality, and it's cool to see the first time he ever played one. But I'm still not done yet, as there's also some really interesting behind the scene details about this episode that were revealed via Steven Hillenburg's pitch Bible. Over the years, fans have gotten production information from different sources, but this pitch Bible is especially important because it shows how early versions of the show were actually being planned. For example, in the case of Bubble Stand, the pitch Bible revealed that the episode was originally going to be titled just Bubbles, so a much simpler title. This pitch Bible also revealed a change involving one of SpongeBob's bubble creations earlier in the episode. In the final cut, like the version that aired on TV that me and you watched as little kids, one of SpongeBob's bubbles floats into Squidward's house, and it's in the shape of an elephant, as you can see here. But it was revealed in the pitch Bible that this bubble was actually going to be a tugboat instead. Another one of the creations that SpongeBob makes in the episode, for the record. Is it a big deal? No, but it's a detail that only somebody as nerdy and dorky as me would care about. And now if you're ever chilling with the homies and you're watching this episode, you can be like, actually, this episode was going to be titled Bubbles. I'm sure that's how I sound when I make these videos. But yeah, there is one more thing I'd like to talk about, as this episode's legacy has continued much later in the series as well, as Bubble Stand was actually referenced 25 years later in the episode Friendiversary, during a quick scene where Squidward is trying to restore SpongeBob's memories. So yeah, it wasn't just the 2000s. It wasn't even just in 2017 with the Honey Nut Cheerios commercial. Even in recent seasons, this episode still gets referenced. So it's just a testament to how iconic Bubble Stand actually is. So the episode A Fish Called Sandy from season 15 actually has like almost an entire video's worth of Easter eggs. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, this is the most amount of Easter eggs I think I've ever covered in one episode, as this episode A Fish Called Sandy has so many, and there's actually a lot of interesting lore and fun facts about this episode as well. But yeah, the episode opens with a scene that immediately lets us know that this is going to be a nostalgic episode, as it kicks off right off the bat with an Easter egg. We see this orange scallop right here perched up on a wooden stand, just chilling in the morning sun. And if this looks familiar, it's because it's nearly a shot-for-shot recreation of the opening of a season 1 episode. If we go back to Opposite Day, that 1999 episode, we get a very similar scene where a scallop sat outside of Squidward's house, and here in this new episode, it mirrors this scene exactly, even down to the same exact wooden perch. Like, if we show them side by side, we can see that it's even the same little wooden platform. And yeah, it's a fitting start for an episode designed as a loving visual tribute to SpongeBob's early years, as you guys will see. I mean, even the title itself, A Fish Called Sandy, is actually a playful reference to the 1988 comedy film A Fish Called Wanda. In fact, the premise of this episode also riffs on the famous short story The Fly and its 1986 film remake about a scientist's experiment gone awry. Here, Sandy Cheeks plays the role of the bold experimenter eager to swap her DNA with a fish, a scenario that promises a lot of comedy and, as you'll see, is jam-packed with so many Easter eggs, guys, like holy cow. Also, just saying, guys, I am a little sick. I just played another concert with my band. Here are some photos from the concert. start and I was singing a lot. I sang like 30 songs, so if my voice is a little bit shaky, that's why. But also, you guys get to see these photos and it's just another reminder that I am not AI and I'm a real boy. But let's keep it going. At the very start of this episode, after the scene with that scallop, Sandy and SpongeBob meet up, and when we first see SpongeBob, he's found goofing around with a crumbled gum wrapper, making it flutter and fold for his own amusement. SpongeBob is a very simple boy. Well, longtime viewers might recognize this as a subtle nod to the season 1 episode, The Paper. You know, the episode where SpongeBob famously entertained himself with like a scrap piece of paper, which caused Squidward to literally go crazy. I'm pretty sure he even gives SpongeBob like the deed to his house to get the paper back. But yeah, this seems to be somewhat of a callback to that, but it also might be a coincidence. Nonetheless, this small detail immediately sets the tone. Nick Jennings, the show's original art director from seasons 1 to 3, makes his return after over 20 years. He was missing for a while, and this dude jam-packed this episode with subtle touches to the show's early days. Even the title card art uses the same background style and hand-drawn lettering from the first season. For example, here's a side-by-side. And there's a ton of other things that make it clear that A Fish Called Sandy is deliberately steeped in nostalgia. But back to the plot. Sandy invites SpongeBob into her tree dome, eager to show off her latest invention. As they enter, observant fans are greeted by an old friend, a very nostalgic Easter egg right here. As if we zoom in over here, we can see Birdie, the same orange bird from Sandy's debut episode, Tea at the Tree Dome. And if we rewind in Sandy's first episode, this little bird was happily seen splashing in the bird bath in that episode as well, only to be rudely interrupted when a desperate SpongeBob dove in to soak up water. Here, over 2 decades later, we see Birdie again, making for a really cool callback. Inside the dome, Sandy unveils her new invention, the Fish You Up machine, a contraption designed to swap genetic traits between animals. It's actually really cool, and as she explains its function, she affectionately calls SpongeBob Square Dude.
Oop that button, Square Dude!
This nickname is actually a reference to Tea at the Tree Dome as well. As in SpongeBob and Sandy's very first meeting back in that episode, Sandy says the following line.
Hold on there, little square dude!
Back in that season 1 episode, it was the first time Sandy ever used that moniker, and it was pretty much the last until this episode. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, guys. There are so many more Easter eggs in this episode. So let's keep it going. As the machine zaps Sandy and Fred, poor Fred, by the way, he was just like signed up against his own will for this experiment, clearly. But as the transformation happens, Sandy undergoes a cartoonishly detailed transformation. We see her grow gills on her neck while her lungs shrivel up, which is animated in almost the exact same way as a scene from the season 2 episode Pressure. If we go back to that episode, Sandy challenged the others to see who could last longer without their usual habitat. And when she removed her helmet underwater, her lungs visibly shrank and dried out as she struggled to hold her breath. Well, A Fish Called Sandy replicates that visual gag lovingly, with her pink lugs deflating just like balloons, just like SpongeBob fans saw back in 2001. Here's a side-by-side, and as you can see, it's very, very similar. Also, to cap it off, the sound effect used when Sandy's lungs are shrinking is actually the very same sound effect that we heard when SpongeBob himself shrank down to a withered sponge on the grill back in Nature Pan. Here's the sound effect from A Fish Called Sandy. And now here's the sound effect from Nature Pants. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm saying here, but they're pretty much the same sound effect. Moving on though, when the smoke clears, Sandy's experiment appears to be a success, at least initially. She now has gills like a fish, meaning she can breathe underwater without her air helmet. But this whole mad science setup is actually more than just a plot device. It's the show's playful take on The Fly, which we mentioned earlier, with Sandy effectively turning into the fish in this scenario. The episode embraces the classic science fiction vibe while filtering it through SpongeBob's quirky lens, giving it that Nickelodeon spin. It's really cool. It's kind of interesting how like the SpongeBob team does this. It's actually a very common thing where there'll be references to very obscure media. The Fly isn't necessarily obscure, but if you're like under the age of like 30, you're not really gonna get the reference, which is why I'm here. With Sandy now able to live like a fish, she and SpongeBob embark on a day of fun. And this kicks off an extended montage that dude has so many Easter eggs in it, and there's a reason for it. As I mentioned mentioned before, this episode served as a one-time return for Nick Jennings, the original art director for the show back in the first 3 seasons. Which, for those of you who don't really understand this role, I'm not gonna go into like depth about it, but pretty much Nick would handle all art. He was in charge of all the art, he'd work with all of the different artists, the storyboard artists, and was a big part of the art style and all of the art tropes from the show's original first few seasons. He was a big deal and really shaped a lot of our childhoods if you're someone like me. So this dude made sure that nearly every shot in this sequence contains a familiar background, character, or gag. For example, the first stop is this meadow where Sandy and SpongeBob frolic and sniff flowers together. Looks like a good time. Well, you may recognize that this backdrop or background right here is actually from the episode Fun, more specifically from SpongeBob's famous Fun song, where we see SpongeBob dance through a meadow of flowers while teaching Plankton about friendship. If we do a side-by-side, we'll see that here, the exact same flower-dotted landscape is lovingly recreated as SpongeBob and Sandy take a moment to appreciate the bloom. And you've probably noticed now at the side-by-side, this is more than a pretty background. It's a direct callback to a fan-favorite musical moment from like 1999, and it's made even more special because Nick Jennings, if we go and look at the credits of the episode Fun, was actually the art director who contributed to this original meadow. And this is going to be a running theme throughout this entire video. So let's continue. After the Fun reference, the montage then kicks into a lively pace. SpongeBob and Sandy don their karate gear, with SpongeBob in red gloves and Sandy in her green, just like the outfits they wore back in Karate Choppers. Another reference. Also, for a brief scene, the pair engage in some friendly karate sparring, which also seems to reference that season 1 episode where their karate obsession first got out of hand back in Karate Chopper. And there's more going on here. Seashell Park, where Sandy and SpongeBob practiced karate back in the same episode, Karate Choppers. This might not seem like actually a big deal, but Seashell Park is a location that hasn't been seen often since its original appearance, making its reappearance here a treat for hardcore fans. The animators even restructured a tiny background detail from the earlier seasons. For example, we can see a Porto Head portable toilet in the park right here. And again, this might not seem like it's a big deal. It might just seem like a random porta potty, right? But this specific outhouse was a common art trope back in the show's first 3 seasons. For example, it was a prop in episodes like Bubble Buddy from season 2 and SpongeGuard on Duty from season 3. But once Nick Jennings left the show after season 4, it visually disappeared from the show entirely. Like, that's a fact. If we look at any episodes after season 4, none of them have this prop, the Porto Head portable toilet. Well, it reappears here in A Fish Called Sandy, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the episode where Nick Jennings returned. So a really cool Easter egg that's kind of like a deep cut. It's seemingly kind of mundane, right? Like, I'm sitting here over explaining a porta potty, but when you understand the lore and history, this is really cool. It is a reference to the show's earlier seasons. And we're not done yet. The montage's rapid fire tributes continue as SpongeBob and Sandy have a laugh in downtown Bikini Bottom. They're shown standing in the city making disgusting armpit farts, which, just saying, back when I was a kid, armpit farts would like really gross me out for some reason. I don't know why. Anything fart related as a kid would make me like so uncomfortable, which is kind of weird, right? I don't know why. I don't even know why I'm telling you this, but this is just the relationship we have, all right? Cartoon Corey and, you know, his subscribers, we have an open relationship. But yeah, they're doing armpit farts right here. And even this shot has a bunch of references. For one, a very specific anchovy incidental character walks past them. A lot of you probably aren't catching this, but this fish is familiar. In fact, he's one of the incidental crowd characters first seen way back in the episode Fun. Specifically from when SpongeBob was searching for Plankton, this anchovy, sometimes dubbed as Incidental CM2, hasn't appeared in like decades. He was essentially a one-off, one-time background character from 1999, most likely created by Nick Jennings. Well, Nick Jennings brought him back, giving us another deep cut detail only nerds like me would ever notice. And the SpongeBob fandom wiki. I'm gonna give them credit for this one. As if that weren't enough, the background of this street scene features the return of this giant red flower arch that eagle-eyed fans might recall from early episodes like Pizza Delivery, Suds, and Nature Pants. This large flower-shaped archway was another signature background element in the first 3 seasons, often visible in wide shots of Bikini Bottom that vanished after Jennings left the show. Again, this is another one that might seem very random, but the lore and history that I'm explaining here is what makes it cool. SpongeBob and the gang never actually visit this thing back in season 1, 2, or 3, and honestly, it's actually a pretty random background detail, but as I mentioned, after season 3, it disappeared. 10-year-old me, like 10-year-old little Corey, certainly did not notice, and I doubt that any of you watching did either, but we now know the answer as to why, and that's that Nick Jennings left the show. So see, some of these things I'm talking about, they're like random, and they seem kind of like mundane, but hopefully you guys are getting the picture here. With the lore, it's actually very interesting stuff. And I mean, I don't mean to brag, as I always say, this is what all content creators should be doing. Like, if you want to make content on YouTube, you should be going the extra mile, but this just shows how hard I go, because if you were to go and look at the Wikipedia page for this episode, all right, the SpongeBobpedia page, there's lots of the stuff I'm talking about, but I've added so much additional lore and history here, and it's because I love this stuff. It's just so interesting to me. I need to touch grass, but let's keep it going. Another quick segment during that same montage shows SpongeBob and Sandy romping across a field of like hydrothermal vents, these things right here, and as they hop from vent to vent, a blast of hot water from one vent blows SpongeBob straight upward, separating his body from his pants for a split second. Well, this visual gag is a clever reference to the funhouse scene all the way back in Valentine's Day from season 1. In that episode's carnival montage, SpongeBob and Patrick walk through a funhouse, where a gust of air blows SpongeBob up, briefly stretching him apart in a very similar cartoonish fashion. I like these ones, honestly, like these kinds of homages where they take a classic gag and reimagine it in a new context show that some of the production team is familiar with the show's history, which is important, right? Like that's the issue with some of modern SpongeBob, is you can tell that the team making modern SpongeBob isn't always super knowledgeable about the show's lore and history. But anyways, I'm rambling, and we're still not done yet, as even SpongeBob's signature pastime, bubble blowing, gets a nod. In one scene, Sandy struggles to blow a bubble, until SpongeBob steps in to demonstrate the technique, just as he famously taught Patrick back in the episode Bubble Stand, another season 1 episode. Now, after a whirlwind day of fun, like Sandy and SpongeBob did a lot of stuff in this episode, especially in that montage, but as it winds down, SpongeBob and Sandy find themselves atop a hill overlooking jellyfish fields. They got a really nice view, just saying, look at how pretty this looks. If we look closely though, this very beautiful moment hides yet another Easter egg in plain sight. If we zoom in right here, we can see a rock-shaped snail, and this is another reference, as if we go back to the episode Nature Pants, this season 1 episode has a moment where SpongeBob tries to live among the jellyfish, and in one scene, to escape a furious Patrick who's trying to get him to come back to society and be a normal person, SpongeBob camouflaged himself by hiding behind a certain something. Now, if we look at these side by side, we can see that very same snail design, a stony shell with a snail's eyes peeking out, is present here, giving us another really cool Easter egg and reference to another classic episode. This is like a 26-year-old reference right here, pretty cool. Back to the plot though, as this moment at Jellyfish Field leads to this episode's turning point, where Sandy starts to shed her fur since she's transformed into a fish now. And when the molting finally stops, we get a close-up of Sandy's new fishy appearance, and she strikes a pose that I kind of found familiar. If we head back to the episode Tea at the Tree Dome, once again, this pose in A Fish Called Sandy is nearly identical to a pose Sandy held, specifically when she first introduced herself to SpongeBob. If we look at them side by side, it isn't like exact, but I mean, it's pretty darn close, right? Like, let me know in the comments what you think. I think that this was a direct reference. But of course, SpongeBob is astonished and a little concerned by Sandy's fully fishy transformation. Like, imagine your friend just transforming into a different creature. But Sandy herself is like stoked about this. And this leads us to Goo Lagoon, where Sandy wants to see if she can actually swim now that she's all fishy. And this location gives us even more Easter egg. And if we look closely, working the counter is none other than the same chef, this guy right here, from all the way back in the episode Ripped Pants. If you don't recognize him, let me explain. This burly purple fish wearing a white t-shirt and a cool chef's hat ran the Goo Lagoon snack bar back in Ripped Pants.
Delivery! Did you order 20 cases of Ripped Pants? Ah!
He's only appeared like a few times since, like for example, he made like a quick cameo in the episode Abandoned Twits, but this episode marks his true return to the series. And there's more going on here, as when SpongeBob leans casually against the McFlaky stand, the background music playing is very familiar. It's a track called You're Nice, and it's actually the very same tune used as the title card music for Ripped Pants. SpongeBob's pose itself here is also a direct reference. He props an arm onto the counter and kicks one foot up behind him, which is almost exactly how he leaned on the ice cream stand back in Ripped Pants just before delivering his lame joke. Seeing SpongeBob strike this same stance here with Sandy by his side chuckling is another really cool reference. But this is where things get really interesting. After grabbing some snacks, SpongeBob and Sandy depart Goo Lagoon and head home. And as they walk along the roadside, viewers are treated to one of the most unexpected location reveals in SpongeBob history. Fish Hooks Park reappears right here. This very rare area, an open field just with a ton of dangling fish hooks everywhere, was of course the central setting of the iconic season 1 episode Hooky. And I mean, it pretty much hasn't been seen since. It's a very rare location, so seeing it here is kind of a big deal. Like if we go back to Hooky, SpongeBob and Patrick infamously played on these fishing hooks like carnival rides, despite Mr. Krabs' warning that they'll end up dead in the gift shop, if you guys remember. It's a classic episode, and to see the same park drawn again here is a deep cut for fans. There's also another musical reference here, as fittingly, the musical score that plays as they approach this location is The Great White, the same dramatic tune that debuted in the original Hooky episode. So not only is there like a physical Easter egg here, but there's also like an audio Easter egg. How cool is that? I would play them, but I'm not trying to get like spirit bombed by Nickelodeon copyright, so let's not risk it. As you can imagine though, Sandy, now fully transformed into like a fishy sea creature, cannot resist the shiny hooks, just like Patrick couldn't all those years ago. So she peers up at a particularly enticing baited hook. Well, there's another Easter egg here, as one of the very worms from all the way back in Rockabye Bavalve is shown curled around the hook Sandy has her eyes on. If you guys need a refresher, it's this worm from Rockabye Bavalve. I'm gonna play the clip, take a look.
Hello, sea creatures! I bring you greetings from Apple World! Wait! We will bury you!
This little purple worm was last seen being plucked from his apple home in that clip I just played you. Somehow I guess he like survived, I don't know how, because here he is again, about to be eaten by Sandy. If we do a side-by-side, we'll see that his design, with the same cute face and purple body, is duplicated exactly. It's like a perfect match. Anyways though, inevitably, Sandy takes the bait, literally. Unable to fight her fishy instincts, she bites the hook, and in an instant, she's yanked upward. This whole sequence lovingly parodies the climax of Hooky, but with the roles reversed. In Hooky, SpongeBob himself got snagged on a hook and was nearly reeled to the surface before jumping off at the last second. In fact, SpongeBob's facial expression of shock as Sandy is pulled upward is drawn exactly like a reaction shot from Karate Choppers, of all places. Specifically the face he made when Mr. Krabs fired him for doing karate at work. It's a very odd reference, but side by side you can see the similarities. It isn't identical, but it is close. Above the ocean, we see live action footage of fishermen on a boat. Another callback to Hooky, which also cut to real fishermen whenever a character was pulled from the water. The fishermen in this episode, however, get a surprise. Instead of a tasty fish, they've reeled in a confused sea squirrel hybrid. In a comedic twist on catch and release, the anglers take one look at Sandy and decide she's not worth, can't really blame them. So they toss her back into the ocean. By now, Sandy is fully embraced behaving like a fish, which leads to one final crazy chase scene. Back in the water, transformed and running on instinct, Sandy starts running through Bikini Bottom. And as SpongeBob pursues her, we get another cool Easter egg, a deep cut, as we can see SpongeBob passes by a wooden fence where we see Gary the snail perched on top, singing a sea shanty tune that we've heard before, as this is actually a recreation of the ending scene from I Was a Teenage Gary. Back in that season 1 episode, a snailified SpongeBob and Squidward joined Gary on a fence to sing a meowing version of Blow the Man Down as the show ended.
Meow, 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 meow.
Meow, 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 meow.
Here in A Fish Called Sandy, only Gary is present on the fence, but he's singing the exact same song.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow, 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 meow.
Dude, what a cool reference. This is a very easy one to miss, but a really cool reference nonetheless. And guys, that actually does it for this episode. Can you believe there was that many Easter eggs in this one freaking episode? Holy cow. I hope you guys enjoyed all the Easter eggs I found, and let's talk about more in another episode. One of the classic episodes from early SpongeBob, titled Clams, centers on Mr. Krabs celebrating a major milestone, that being him earning his millionth dollar.
What's wrong with Mr. Krabs?
Do you know what this is? You have just given me my $1 millionth.
What do I win?
Nothing! Everybody get out! You're spoiling me moment!
Our favorite Grady Crab is absolutely freaking stoked about this, as you can imagine. And to celebrate, Mr. Krabs drags SpongeBob and Squidward on a fishing trip instead of the fancy vacation that they were expecting. I mean, this is Mr. Krabs we're talking about here, the cheapest cartoon character in the history of cartoon characters. Can any of you even name another cartoon character that is as greedy as Eugene Krabs over here? Anyways though, trouble strikes when a giant clam, known as Old Blue Lip, swallows that shiny millionth dollar, which sends Mr. Krabs into like a tweaking frenzy. Like, our boy is just flipping out in this episode. And this brings us into our first reference, as the rest of this episode parodies the movie Jaws. But we'll get into the Jaws thing in a moment. For now, let's talk about some really interesting lore about this episode, as there was an entire scene that got cut and deleted. As I mentioned, the episode begins with Mr. Krabs being very excited about his new millionth dollar. But originally, the writers planned an extra dark comedic beat right after that celebration, one that never made it onto television. In the Clam storyboard, which was included as a bonus on one of the SpongeBob DVDs, Mr. Krabs was going to pick up the Krusty Krab phone and call his parents to boast about his new accomplishment. This would lead to a punchline, if you even want to call it that, where it would cut to a shot of two tombstones, revealing that Mr. Krabs' parents are long dead.
No! This is my $1 millionth earned!
Every Krab's goal in life is to make $1 million, and now I got mine! Mom, Dad, I've finally done it! I've made me millionth dollar! That's great, son!
This morbid joke went as far as having art assets like made for it for the episode. For example, we can see painted background art made for the gravestones and for the payphone that was supposed to be inside the Krusty Krab. But as I've mentioned, this scene was eventually cut during production. And why? There are two big reasons. First, it created a continuity error. Mr. Krabs' mother, Mama Krabs, or also known as Betsy Krabs, had already appeared alive in earlier episodes. For example, in the episode Sailor Mouth from season 2, where she scolded Mr. Krabs for his bad language. Here's the thing though, Betsy Krabs was also slated to appear in another season 3 episode titled Midlife Crustacean, so killing her off in Clams would conflict with those appearances. In terms of Mr. Krabs' father, we hadn't actually met the dude yet. He does eventually appear later on, but at this point we didn't really know much about it. Nonetheless, the storyboard team realized that they were about to orphan Mr. Krabs, so they wisely pulled the plug. But there's even another reason, as even by SpongeBob standards, the joke was honestly very, dark. It's basically just a joke about Mr. Krabs' parents being dead, with no, actual payoff, which is funny that they were going to do it, but it would have felt somewhat out of place considering the lighthearted nature of this episode. Moving on though, once the episode shifts to the fishing trip portion of the episode, Clams goes full on Jaws. It's like a love letter to the movie, with almost every aspect of the famous 1975 shark thriller being spoofed. In fact, Clams was originally going to wear its inspiration on its sleeve, as the working title for the episode was originally Sponge Jaws. Early production materials and model sheets still refer to it by that name, as you can see right here. So this isn't just some sort of long-time rumor. Nickelodeon eventually changed the title to the less on-the-nose Clams, likely to avoid any legal issues or too obvious allusions to Jaws. But let's dive into some of these references. For example, the plot and characters. Just like in Jaws, where three men, Quint, Brody, and Hooper, head out on a boat to hunt a great white shark, here we have Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob, and Squidward on a boat hunting a giant clam. Mr. Krabs is the Quint of the story, the obsessed sea captain driven to madness by the creature, while SpongeBob takes on the role of Chief Brody and Squidward takes on the role of Matt Hooper. And there's other references. For example, the boat they use is called the SS Cheapskate, a direct reference to the SS Orca from Jaws. And there's also the musical cues, as the music in this episode is very similar to John Williams' score for Jaws. Even the episode's title card art and lettering evoke the style of Jaws posters from back in the day. And there's even scenes that are very similar to scenes from Jaws. For example, when Mr. Krabs uses SpongeBob and Squidward as bait to lure in the monster clam, as this mirrors a scene from Jaws, of course, where the character Hooper is also used as bait to lure in a shark. But Jaws wasn't the only sea tale echoed in Clams. The episode also has some cool references to the classic novel Moby Dick. In fact, just like Jaws, one of the early working titles for Clams was Moby Dollar, which, I mean, come on, an obvious reference to Moby Dick. Not only that, but there's also a gag in the episode that directly references the book. And honestly, it's something that went completely over my head as a little kid. But later on in the episode, when Mr. Krabs is really freaking out about the dollar, he throws all of SpongeBob and Squidward's food off of the boat. They're like literally stranded on this boat, so they're just screwed now, and all that's left is one sandwich.
Then I guess I have no choice but to offer a reward.
You're kidding.
It's this sandwich.
A sandwich? You expect me to break my back over a sandwich?
This is actually a reference to Moby Dick, as in that book, the captain nails a gold coin to the ship as a reward for whoever spots Moby Dick first. Now, one other thing I want to talk about in regards to this episode that's very interesting is that this episode was actually Steven Hillenburg recycling some of his older work, as Clams shares a plot and even a specific joke with an episode of Rocko's Modern Life, another cartoon that SpongeBob's creator Steven Hillenburg worked on in the 1990s. The episode in question is Fish in Chumps from 1995, where Rocko and his friends go on a fishing trip and encounter a massive vengeful fish. If this sounds familiar, it's because, I mean, come on, it's very similar to Clams and is very similar to Jaws as well. It seems that Hillenburg essentially took the fun framework from that Rocko episode and refashioned it for SpongeBob and a clam. We know this because this episode, Clams, was made by both Steven Hillenburg and written by Mark O'Hare. And if we go back to Fish and Chumps, that episode was also made by Steven Hillenburg and written by the same writer, Mark O'Hare. So I imagine that these two are massive fans of Jaws. Both episodes even feature a very similar gag. In Clams, while the Krusty crew are going fishing, SpongeBob accidentally uses Mr. Krabs' millionth dollar as bait, literally casting it into the ocean. As this happens, music very similar to the movie Jaws starts to play. Very suspenseful, dramatic music. Mr. Krabs realizes this and breaks the fourth wall, with him acknowledging the music and telling it to stop.
Stop playing that music! Stop it, please!
Well, this exact same gag happened back in that Rocko's Modern Life episode. That same style of music starts playing just as one of the characters is in trouble. And because of this, we get the exact same gag, with the character Filbert acknowledging the music and stealing this dude's instrument right here.
Someone, do something quick!
So yeah, lots of cool details when it comes to this episode. It's a classic episode and it's a banger. Let me know in the comments how you guys felt about this Clams section. Just because this one has no Easter eggs, it's more just behind the scenes and just facts about this episode. So let me know if you guys actually enjoyed that. Either way though, let's head over to another episode. Dude, this next episode has so many Easter eggs, so get ready, it's gonna be fun. SpongeBob on Parade finds Bikini Bottom hosting its annual parade, and Mr. Krabs seizes the opportunity for free publicity, which is very fitting of our favorite greedy crab. He enters a Krusty Krab float into the parade, and honestly, this episode is like just built for Easter eggs. When Mr. Krabs informs SpongeBob and Squidward about the parade contest, Squidward claims that he has no idea what kind of float to build, so Mr. Krabs cheerfully tells him to use your imagination. And you guys can probably guess what's coming here, as upon hearing that magic word, SpongeBob instantly strikes a classic pose.
You get to be creative and use your imagination.
Imagination.
For the like 2 of you who don't know this moment is a direct reference to the beloved Idiot Box gag, where SpongeBob and Patrick use imagination to play in a cardboard box, much to Squidward's confusion and annoyance.
Squidward, we don't need television. Not as long as we have our imagination.
On top of this, not only does SpongeBob form the rainbow above his head, but the rainbow itself drips and falls apart like liquid, which is also another reference, as this exact same thing happened during a musical number in Suction Cup Sympathy did I just say sympathy? I meant Suction Cup Symphony. Let me get it right, that's how you know I'm not AI, alright? But yeah, play the clip. This gag in Sponge on Parade is another 2-for-1 Easter egg, but this is like light work compared to some of the Easter eggs coming up, guys. Like, this episode has so many. Charged with building the float, SpongeBob goes into construction mode, which triggers another sly Easter egg. If we do a side-by-side, this is like the exact same construction worker outfit he wore back in the episode Stuck on the Roof. In that season 11 episode, SpongeBob donned the getup to fix a problem on the Krusty Krab's roof. The fact that SpongeBob is wearing the exact same outfit is really cool. What's also cool is the scene that follows, as the actual float building sequence continues with another like neat Easter egg, guys. So many in this episode. Squidward sends SpongeBob off to find materials to build the float, and the show highlights a dumpster overflowing with wood and junk by shining a single spotlight on it. I noticed this right away, but this is a clear gag to season 4's The Play's The Thing, as in that episode, there's a very similar scene. Squidward puts on a play at the Krusty Krab, and at one point, a heavenly spotlight highlights a dumpster.
Oh, the trash is full. I had better call the garbage truck. Beep, 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 beep.
Talent.
The true Easter eggs, though, really start to appear when it's time for the actual parade. Perch Perkins, the Bikini Bottom news reporter, is joined by the Ice Cream King, a very obscure character who first and last appeared in the season 12 episode Patrick's Coupon. Back in that episode, the Ice Cream King challenged Patrick to a series of contests, but in this episode, he's back as a co-host for the parade. And a funny bit of dialogue is that the Ice King expresses surprise that Perch Perkins is like a real person.
Hey, you're that guy! How'd you get out of my TV, you bad little boy?
There's actually also another really cool like detail going on here, as when the camera zooms in on Perch Perkins, he's wearing light purple face powder. There's like these splotches of purple on his face. And this isn't random. It's an Easter egg poking fun at Perch Perkins' inconsistent coloring throughout the series. From season 1 up until like season 8, Perch Perkins was always colored as orange. For example, in the episodes Once Bitten, we can see it here, that he's orange. Or in the episode Blackjack, we can see him on TV and he's orange. And here's one more example to show you. If we look at Computer Overload, he's orange. But this changed like very randomly in season 9. Out of nowhere, starting with the episode Squid Plus One, look, Perch randomly became purple. This would go back and forth over the years. For example, in season 9's What's Eating Patrick, he's again purple, but in a later episode from the same season, in Goodbye Krabby Patty, he's back to being orange. Well, according to supervising director Dave C., the purple blotches on Perk's face in SpongeBob on Parade are a deliberate reference to this flip-flopping color scheme over the years. It's supposed to be makeup, so it's not just me speculating, this is confirmed by SpongeBob-like staff. In fact, Dave noted that Perch has recently been revealed to be permanently orange, and this was thanks to his CGI model in Camp Coral. They decided that if he's orange in like the prequel show, he should remain orange throughout the regular show, which I definitely agree with. Another cool Easter egg can also be found during the same scene if we rewind a little bit, because if we look at the crowd of people, there's a ton of Bikini Bottomites. There is one person who's very notable, and that's right here. We can see Flats the Flounder. I'm zooming in on him. Flats is the infamous bully from the season 3 episode The Bully, known for basically threatening to kick SpongeBob's butt throughout the entire episode.
Hi, I'm SpongeBob.
Hi, SpongeBob. I'm gonna kick your butt.
He's not called out by name in this episode, but he makes a bunch of cameos. Moving on though, as the parade kicks off, the first act is another Easter egg. It's none other than the marching band led by Pearl Krabs, and the animators treat us to a wave of nostalgia during this scene. as those outfits they're wearing, I mean, come on, they're the exact same Bubble Bowl uniforms from the legendary Season 2 episode Band Geeks. In that episode, Squidward's ragtag band wore red and black marching outfits for their awesome Bubble Bowl performance. And here, Pearl and all of her high school friends sport the exact same outfits. And dude, I love it so much. Band Geeks is like one of my childhood favorite episodes. Sweet, sweet victory, baby. During one of the scenes of Plankton's float, we can see another deep cut character, Patrick Not Star, the Patrick doppelganger from the Season 7 episode Hide and Then What Happens. I'm sure a lot of you guys don't remember this character, so let me explain. SpongeBob's looking for Patrick and ends up running into this guy thinking that he's Patrick.
I can't believe it. Patrick, it really is you.
My name is Patrick. Patrick Not Star.
In SpongeBob on Parade, Patrick Not Star appears in the same way that Flats the Flounder does, where he's just casually in the background sometimes, like he's in this shot right here if we zoom in. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this episode. I mean, Fred does show up and he has an entire float dedicated to like his leg breaking, which is like kind of, you know, an Easter egg. Also, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy show up despite not having any lines. So it's cool to see them, but that's pretty much it for references in this episode. And let's head into another one with more.